Hello book lovers! In this video I'm going to share with you the 10 best books of 2023 as selected by the New York Times Book Review. Which ones have you read and which ones are you interested in reading? Let's have a look, shall we? The first book on the list is The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. This book just missed out on winning the Booker Prize. It's 600 pages long and it focuses in on a 2.4 family who are rather affluent, doing well, but then their gradual disintegration both financially and emotionally and their outlook on life. Now, the family itself, the dad is Dickie and he runs a car business, a motor business. But when the financial crash happens, obviously things start going terribly wrong. And he apparently runs away into the woods and starts digging himself a bunker to prepare for the end of the world kind of thing. His wife, who is a local beauty, a stunner, her name's Imelda, she's got to face the change in lifestyle that she's used to, having to start selling possessions that she really liked in order to keep some money coming in. The daughter, Cassie, was preparing for university, but now she's worried, will her future be the same now that this is happening to the family? What does the future hold for her? Will all of her plans and dreams be changed? And finally, there's the young boy, PJ, and his main focus is his mum and dad, and whether they'll get divorced, whether the family will survive. And what the book does is it takes a look at the story from all four perspectives. This is quite a popular way of writing books at the moment, of narratology. Looking at it from all four perspectives as they go through changes in the weather, which are sort of reflective of the climate change idea, and how their lives mimic the troublesome climate which people talk about today. The second book on the list is Chain Gang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This is supposedly a more grown-up version of The Hunger Games and has a focus specifically on criminals and convicts. And what happens in this is people or teams from different prisons are formed and forced into a kind of gladiatorial combat situation on the Criminal Agency Penal Entertainment channel, I think it is. It's called CAPE. And the idea is, if you're one of the gladiators, if you can last 3 months on tour fighting against other convicts from around the country, you can gain your freedom. Now, the convicts, of course, are watched by people on TV. This is where the viewer gets their entertainment, very much like the Roman days. But also the reader is supposedly supposed to be entertained as well. But this is how it works. The prisoners from each prison do not fight each other. They are called links. They're part of a chain gang representing their prison, and they'll only fight and kill people from other prisons. Of course, as people watch, different ones become celebrities, pop icons, all that kind of stuff. And hopefully, someone can make it to the end and survive for 3 months and then be given their freedom. But where this differs is it brings a political standpoint to the forefront as opposed to just genre fiction like The Hunger Games. Nana Kwame is making a comment that the majority of the convicts in these gladiatorial arenas are black, and the entertainment is done for more white viewers. And he's trying to shine a light on a growing industrial racism. Now, I know many people have differing ideas politically on this, and I am politically neutral, so I don't want to be embroiled in that. But this is just one author's perspective. I don't know if this is the kind of book that you would read or it excites you. It's certainly got a certain amount of adrenaline in it, although I'm not sure it's necessarily my cup of tea. However, I can't judge the book because I haven't read it. I'm just telling you what the New York Times Book Review said was one of the best 10 books of 2023. The third book on the list is Eastbound by Melis de Carangal. This book really sounds intriguing. So, you have a protagonist called Alyosha. He is in the army, he's about 20 years of age, but he wants to escape the army. So, he plans on getting on a Trans-Siberian train and going from Moscow all the way across Russia to Vladivostok, which is like, you know, the dangly bit at the end of Russia on the east side hanging above Japan. It's that area. It's a quarter of the globe in distance that he wants to travel. When he gets there, his plan is that he's going to go to ground and hide, maybe assume some kind of different identity and build up enough money so that later he can make the move back to Moscow and continue his life after he's been forgotten. But what is a train journey without meeting a stranger on the train? And so does Alyosha. He bumps into a French woman called Hélène, or Hélène, and you know, they get talking, and there's that fission between two characters that you get. But apparently she's not all that meets the eye. She's got her own secrets of some kind, and they set out to help each other. And all the way on this long journey, they've got to keep dodging the officer on the train so that he doesn't get caught. And this involves all sorts of escapades and tricks and psychological details. But the story apparently goes on with quite a lot of narrative, this escaping and dodging and moving, but also a lot of internal thoughts, questioning inside what's going through our mind in life. This sounds very much the kind of book I would pick up and read. Tell me if you've read it in the comments down below, or if it intrigues you as much as it intrigues me. The fourth book is The Fraud by Zadie Smith. Now this one seems to have quite a few threads weaving in and out. The main character whose eyes we see the story through is Eliza Touchette, who is a maid for the real and famous William Ainsworth, one of the most famous writers of the early Victorian era. Now we have some comments about his life and observations on society. But rather than go into that, I want to tell you about the main focus where the book gets its title from, The Fraud. And that is a real legal case in Britain, the longest in history actually, called the Tichborne case. So Lord Roger Tichborne was drowned at sea, apparently, or at least went missing at sea. Years later, a butcher from Australia turns up in Britain claiming that he is Lord Roger Tichborne. There's a problem though. He hasn't got the refinements of a gentleman. He's sort of got a bit of a Cockney accent, which is sort of the slum ends of London. He's much bigger and heavier than Lord Tichborne, and he doesn't speak a word of French. Now, Lord Tichborne's first language was French, but this claimant doesn't speak a single word of French. However, it captures the public imagination. And Eliza, along with a woman called Stephanie, you'll have to find out how she meets her by reading the book, they go into the court, and it's how Eliza looks at society and the reaction of the working class to this man who's claiming to be a lord, and rather than reviling him, he sort of becomes a public hero. But on top of that, much of the testimony comes from a Mr. Bogle, the chief witness in favour of the claimant, as he's called. Now, Bogle used to be a slave, a manservant, black manservant for Lord Tichborne's family, and he is actually supporting the claimant. How is it all going to work out? That is the setting of The Fraud by Zadie Smith. The fifth book is North Woods by Daniel Mason. Now, I know a lot of you are already reading this book, and it's gaining quite a lot of traction and critical acclaim as we speak. Partly because of the ingenious approach to a story and the depth of reality that we recognise in the movement of time and of living and people who have passed before us. The story takes place in New England in America, and it sees quite a number of people through different generations. You know, you've got some Puritans, you've got soldiers who try and give up warfare, give up gunpowder, I think the soldier says. You've got others who are on southern business. That's a man who is chasing slaves. And then there's a huntsman and other figures. And they all come at different points in this area. It's all set around a particular cabin. and how certain things in life are maintained despite the disruption of the world and the environment around them. Now, there's an apple orchard in this book, and we're introduced to it because of an accidentally dropped apple seed which takes root in the area that the story is going, or the whole book is going to take place. And so comes forth an apple orchard that's developed. But over time, what are the vicissitudes of environment and of people's effect on the environment? For instance, if you have an apple orchard and a squirrel drops an acorn, and that acorn decides to take root, what could happen to the apple orchard? Or what about spores brought in on dog fur? Or what about people who move in and, they're in the cabin and they're spending a few weeks of a loving summer, but what do they bring in from the outside which could affect that little world which has already seen so many different generations live in it and pass? And we get to see different time periods where individuals live their lives on the same plot or in the same area, and how time really is this very delicate gossamer fabric of so many interacting imponderables and almost unlikelihoods, as well as lots of people who we don't give a thought to that came before us, or the people who will come after us who may inhabit the same place. That's North Woods by Daniel Mason. The sixth book is The Best Minds by Jonathan Rosen. Now, this is a true life account. In this, Jonathan Rosen talks about his own friend, Michael Lauder, whom he knew as a child. They went through Yale University together, I believe, if I remember my research correctly. And Michael Lauder was a brilliant intellectual. He was a fantastic never say die character. His go-getter attitude, and he was climbing through the intellectual society, levels of society in America, when schizophrenia suddenly brought it to a grinding halt, but didn't stop Lauder completely, or Lauder I should say, because he managed to get a hold on it, turn it around, and actually turned it to his advantage. Hollywood got hold of the story, and there was money to be made out of it, but there was still something ominous coming in the future involving a terrible crime. But what Jonathan Rosen does in this book is he doesn't just tell an account or a story. He's looking at the West's attitude towards mental health, how it's dealt with. You think of the earlier 20th century when you were put in asylums and padded cells and electrocuted to see what that would do to you if you had mental disorders. But then how mental health issues have been divided along political lines, not necessarily just medical, but where politics maybe shouldn't come into play. Both left-wing and right-wing, idealism more on the left, economic ideas more on the right, and how that has affected so much. And Rosen explores this through the story of a most remarkable person that he knew and grew up with. This one really intrigues me. The seventh book is supposedly quite funny but fascinating and points out the absurd in the world that we live in right now. It's also based on real life, and it is Bottoms Up and the Devil Laughs by Kerry Howley, and it concerns itself with a real-life intelligence specialist called Reality Winner, I believe is the name, if I've got that right. Now, Reality Winner decides, as just a solo individual, to take a state secret and stuff it up her skirt and walk out of the building with it. Now, what prompts her to do this, I have no idea, but that's what happens. And 5 or 6 pages that she takes and prints out and get into the wrong hands, or she gives and trusts them to the wrong people, and so begins a terrible story which will take her from out in the sticks in Texas to, the federal courts. But through this, Kerry Howley apparently really gets us to analyse the world that we live in, and the fact that we are in a post-privacy civilization, that everything we do is recorded. and that everyone we know are connections to us which are also mapped out there as long as the internet exists. And we get insights into various different people like Lady Gaga and Edward Snowden and apparently a search dog. Apparently, I don't know how that fits in. But it questions the essential nature of our lives being stored on the internet and how everything we've done has been recorded and will always be there so long as the World Wide Web is up and running. And when you stop to think about it, that's quite a terrifying thought. In fact, I'm sure you know of others who have got in trouble on the media because of these things. If anyone's read this book, please comment down below. Tell me if you would recommend it. And by the way, any of the books on this list, if you would like to see me read them on this channel and give you my really honest opinion of these books, please point out certain suggestions that you would like for me to read. And if enough people nominate one, then I'll go ahead and do it for you. The 8th book is Fire Weather by John Vaillant. Now this book records or goes back through in meticulous detail the accounts of the Great Fire of, is it 2016 in Alberta? And it's focused on the industry, the oil industry in Fort McMurray in Canada, which gives something like 30-40% of oil to America. And it's this enormous industrial complex, yet at the same time surrounded in forests. But he accounts for how the mining for oil in the bitumen sands in Alberta and the effect of climate change can come together to create an absolute apocalypse. Now, I will say this about climate change right here. I know some people feel very strongly about it pro, and some people feel very strongly against it. I'm not debating any of that. I keep my channel free of all those arguments. But nonetheless, it was a fascinating point in time, and it's interesting to listen to people's opinions on it, because John Vaillant goes over the actual big fire in Alberta, which was called Fire Number 9, or Fire 9, I think it was, and how when it was first identified, how quickly it had spread to 500 times its size, and 2 hours later had doubled in size again. But what was so amazing about this fire in particular is it went to the river near Fort McMurray. Now, where is that river? What's it called? It's the Athabasca River. It's about 1/3 of a mile wide, and yet the fire managed to leap it into the forests. And that's obviously a big deal. And John Vaillant describes the progress of this. He gives you an insight into the sheer wealth that's in the oil industry. Fort McMurray is often called Fort McMoney, according to John Vaillant, when it's really producing, when there's a real high need for oil. And so he looks at all those things and how we and communities coexist with industry and nature together. I think personally this sounds like a very fascinating topic to get the real inside loop on a very, very dramatic event. If you remember these fires on the news, you probably do if you're from North America, was it like 80,000 people were displaced from their homes because of these fires? Because, you know, they just spread like wildfire. I didn't mean to use that expression, but you can see where it comes from. So that was the 8th one, Fire Weather by John Vaillant. In 19th century America, John Smith has 2 daughters. One is Eliza, whom he has with his wife, and his other daughter is Ellen, whose mother is John Smith's slave. Now, when the girls grow up and Eliza is getting married, the mother gives Ellen as a present to Eliza to go with her when she goes and sets up a new home. Now, because Ellen is pretty much white, she gets the job in Eliza's house as a housemaid or a house slave. But while she's there, Ellen meets William Craft, who is another slave, and they fall in love. Now, they begin to plot how to escape from the South to freedom, but this is in 1848, so quite a way before the Civil War breaks out in America. Ellen is very good at being a seamstress, and so she will spend a lot of time preparing clothes to make her look like a lady of refinement who is ill and is going north to seek some medicine. And William, her husband, will act as if her slave. And this recounts in great detail their plans and then the brave journey to escape slavery. They'll actually have to, travel on the steamboats. They actually pass through, Savannah, where there is a great slave market. They have to encounter difficulties in the way they behave with each other, in reading and writing, because Ellen herself, being a slave, she hasn't been taught to read or write. How are they going to overcome all these obstacles and get to freedom? It sort of sounds like Colson's Underground Railroad, but this is very, very true to life, and a very close look at just this couple with an absolutely remarkable story. Have you read this book? What is it? Master Slave, Husband, Wife by Il-Yong Wu. If you've read it, please tell me whether you would recommend me reading it, or if any of you or a lot of you want me to review it on this channel. The 10th book on the New York Times Book Review's Best Books of 2023 is Some People Need Killing by Patricia Evangelista. This is a work of investigative journalism in the Philippines during the presidency of Rodrigo Duterte, from, when's that, 2016, 2022, when he campaigned to become a president on saying he would kill suspected criminals. He would solve crime. He used to be the mayor, didn't he, in a town where he tried to squish a lot of crime by very dramatic means. And death squads were formed under Duterte's regime, where some estimate that about 10,000 people, suspected criminals, were killed extrajudicially. Some say double or triple that number. Now, what Evangelista does is she interviews members of the family and the friends of those who were killed. Also, she interviews people from the death squads and captures what the world was like in the Philippines at that time, what built up to it, how it was perceived by others. And the title itself is curious. Some people need to be killed. That comes from I think it was one of the death squad members whom she interviewed. And he said to her, "I'm not all bad. It's just some people need to be killed." And that's a very interesting moral stance, or way of compartmentalizing your behavior. Actually shows the dark side of political thought. And I'm not saying on either side. The political thought can be bad in any compass, any direction of the compass on the political spectrum. But that sounds quite fascinating. That's the kind of book I would imagine would stick with you for a long time. It's the kind of book I could imagine I could read and be fascinated by, and enjoy in an academic sense. But I can also imagine that it would give you icy chills, to read about that meticulous, unfeeling way of wiping out people because you suspect that they're criminals, and that those doing it can justify it, and the terror you must live in under that kind of situation. Sort of reminds one of the Gestapo, doesn't it? So there are the 10 best books of 2023 according to the New York Times Book Review. Please comment down below. Tell me which ones you've read or which ones appeal to you. And if enough of you happen to pick the same book, if there's one you would like me specifically to review, by all means suggest it, and I'll get round to reading and reviewing it for you. I'll see you in the next video where I reveal which book has been nominated for me to read next and review for you.